Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're around the world. Welcome back, where we do have a slightly slimmed down team this week. John is away digging fossils, but he's wherever he is, he's preoccupied. And Diane is very, very badly jet lagged because she has just where Sam and myself, and she'll be the next few months actually. So she'll be going down to London and Oxford, but she will be up here in a few weeks' time, and so you will get to see Diane and myself do of Around the Museum with Joe and Diane, which the last series is, or rather I should say, filmed is currently premiering YouTube. So sometime next year we will be showing the series Time with Diane. So that's all. Of course, mention that is happening in July. So check out information about on our website, Creation Research, us in person here, which is all very exciting. We do have Glenn and Sam with us, and yes, thank you, Doki. Have been having a microphone, so I'm going to be quiet now. To Craig to kick the over to you.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everybody. It's good to be here again. It's good to see some of our local chatsters already on and chatting away. It almost feels like we know you, even though we've never met. But just a couple of things. I mentioned last week that I'd gone down to our World Heritage site in Port Arthur, which is in southern Tassie, for its historical reasons. But while I was down there, I was able to look around for a few fossils, and here's a lovely big brachiopod fossil, one of the bigger ones that I've found. That's the internal muscle cast, and it's the ventral cast. It's the bottom side, and you know that because of this dip here. So that's showing you that's the bottom side. It's a muscle cast of a brachiopod. And given that we've got a bit of time today with what we're doing, I thought I'd show you this one as well. This is one that I found over in Western Tasmania. It was very interesting to some of the expert geologists and fossil collectors at the Gem Fair there. So you get a bit of a look at that there. I'll show a few different angles and side on. So what is it? Well, I wasn't certain about it. That's how it came out of the rock pretty well. But the experts at first thought it might have been like a sort of nautiloid, straight nautilus. But then because of this curve and the fact that it's not doesn't have sides on it, they started to think it was from the back of quite a large trilobite. There is a big trilobite that's found in southern Australia. Its species name is King Lakensis. So that's what they thought it was. So that's just a couple of finds that we've been doing. And I've got a couple of slides which I'll get up and just a bit of a talk that I've been looking at. I'll show you the book by John Osgood, who's associated with Creation Research here in Australia. He's a real expert on some of the dispersal parts, and I find it really interesting. This is a sign that some of our regular viewers would be familiar with that we have at our museum at the Creation Discovery Centre, showing the biblical timeline from Adam through to Jacob, the pre-flood timeline. And I've had people that are not believers say, you know, this is the first time I've ever heard the message of the Bible presented, linking it in with real history. So a lot of people find this quite interesting. And I thought we'd just work through it. You can see the time frames. This is part of a talk on the present is not the key to the past, because if the present is the key to the past, then our ages of living 70, 80 through to maybe maximum 100 years would indicate that in the past, that's what people have done at best. And that makes 900-year-old life spans unrealistic. But if it's not that way, if something's happened, and of course those who are familiar with this subject would know it was the global flood there, the blue line that goes down through there, that is the changing point in history, and it is in fact the past that was vastly different. God created a good world, and in that good world, even though sin had tainted it, people could live at least 900 years, and that carried right through to Noah, who also lived 900, even though it was sort of 1700 years after Adam. Whereas after the flood, then you go down through Arphaxad. This is on the line of Shem through Arphaxad, and you get down through to Jacob. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Sorry, I have to click on that. There we go. That should be moving through. Now, Josephus, the first century historian, said this: "Let no one, upon comparing the lives of the ancients with our lives and with the few years which we now live, think that what we have said of them is false. Now I have for witnesses to what I said, all those who have written antiquities." And he then goes on to list the Greeks and the barbarians, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, and a few others. And they all agree to what I here say, that the ancients lived 1,000 years. So Josephus was very, very certain that the biblical history was true, the pre-flood history of their ancestors. So when the ark landed on Mount Ararat, the Bible says how they moved east onto a plain. So they may have moved onto that plain even further north than that. And eventually the Tower of Babel was being built, and that's where God dispersed the people through confusion of the languages. And so I just wanted to work quickly through a summary, and I think using Noah's grandsons is an interesting summary of how the dispersal began. And this again comes from John Osgood's book. I hope I'm doing John credit with what I've put together as a summary, because it obviously becomes quite complicated as different peoples interacted with other peoples, conquered them, and so on. But early on, at least, you can get a general drift of where people went. So looking at the sons of Ham first, John says how they came around this way, most likely skilled with boats, and they came around this way. And you've got Cush went into Ethiopia, and in fact the ancient name for Ethiopia was Cush, and that's probably now our North Sudan. And then a lot of the Cushites spread out through Africa, and then others moved in as well. Mizraim, grandson of Noah, the ancient name for Egypt, and that is obviously the Egyptian area. And then you've got Put, which John Osgood believes really to be the father of the Berber tribes, so the North Africans, sometimes used to describe Libya. There's some dispute about that, but at least the Put descendants were most likely the Berbers. And then you've got Canaan, and most people have heard of the Canaanites and the land of Canaan, and that was a grandson of Noah. So people go, oh, a real person. Yes, it was. But the Canaanites also are linked with the Chinese. And so John's done some great work just recently linking this together. Now, we have Mount Sinai in the southern part there, just where the bottom of the arrow leading to Canaan over in the Canaanite area is. And that's quite possibly a link to the same term, the Sinites, the Chinese. So even today, we talk about Australian Sino-political relations and your US-Sino relations. And this is where it comes from, the Sinites, descendants of Canaan. And the Canaanites also spread through into India, Southeast Asia, and are probably the ancestors of even the Australian Aboriginals. Again, I just highlight that it is quite complex, but this is a broad picture. Now, the sons of Japheth, let's have a look at those. So Javan, often referred to as the father of the Greeks. So he's moved through this way. And some of his sons, for example, Rhodonim is where we get Rhodes Island and the Rhone River. So they moved through that. Rhodes Island has been called Rhodes Island for as long as people can remember. And that's a descendant of Javan. So Greece, Italy, and most likely the early settlers of Tarshish. Tarshish being Great Britain. Some people think it's Spain because there's Tarsus there, but it's a good chance that it worked the other way, that they were in Great Britain where they mined tin, and the Bible refers to tin being mined in Cornwall, England, and that's in Tarshish, and they then moved across to Spain and settled there at Tarsus. Madai, another grandson of Noah. The Madais or the Medes and the Persians from Madai. You've got Tubal, another grandson of Noah in the Turkey region, also mentioned by later prophets in the Bible. You've got Magog. They crossed the Caucasus there between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they became the Slavic groups and others later on. And then you've got Gomer, who is the father of the Scythians, and they moved back around into Turkey. So when Ezekiel 38 talks about Gomer, it's most likely talking about the Turkey region, but certainly Russia, Turkey sort of connection there. So that's the sons of Japheth. Oh, actually, Gomer, one more there, is also the father of the Celts and the Gauls, who moved, of course, across into Europe and the French area. Okay, so that's a bit of a picture of dispersal from Babel from two of the sons of Noah and their sons. But then we've got Shem, who his descendants largely stayed around the original area. And so here are his descendants all there together, spread from Babel. Elam, we've got there to the east of Babel. And in the scriptures, we hear of Abraham interacting with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and the Elamites, who came over with several other kings and attacked a range of kings over in the Sodom and Gomorrah area. And then Abraham got involved because his nephew Lot was taken captive by them. You've got Asher there, and that's where we get the term Assyrians. And in Australia, just the last week, we had some bad news of an attack on an Assyrian bishop. So this is fresh in a lot of Australians' minds. They've heard of Assyrians, and interestingly, that comes from Asher, the son of Shem. Aramaic. Most people have heard of the Aramaic language. That comes from Aram, and most likely the Arameans are from that line as well, although there is some dispute about that. There's Lud, is where we get the term Lydia, and then Arphaxad, which is the one that we get the line of Abraham through. So let's just highlight Arphaxad for a moment. His great-grandson, I think it was, is Eber, and that's where we get the term Hebrews from, the Hebrews, if you like. And that's why Abraham, who was a descendant down the line of Eber, is referred to as Abraham of the Hebrews. Now, he probably didn't take that path that I've drawn there across the desert, but that's more indicative of where he ended up. He was instructed by God to go to the land of Canaan, and that's where he went. And of course, the Canaanites had been well established by that time that this happened. So, yeah, there's just the link there. Eber, the grandson of Arphaxad, the great-grandson of Shem. And in Genesis 14, we get Abraham called Abraham the Hebrew, and that's why. But let's have a look at Jacob. I often ask the people that come to the museum, what did Jacob change his name to? And a lot of them sort of shake their head, don't know. And I said, well, his name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel, basically. And most people go, oh, really? Yeah, real person, and it's a real place even to this day. So Jacob, when he was in a time of drought, moved down to Egypt with his family, not realising it that one of his youngest sons, Joseph, had become second in charge of Egypt. And so that's why he had the opportunity to meet Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And this is the exchange here in Genesis 47. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So basically here, Israel is acknowledging that his forefathers lived longer than him, even though he was 130 years old. And he ended up living to 147. But he knew that he wasn't going to live as long as Abraham, which was about 180, and so on. So what's going on? What did the flood change? Well, I think genetics is one of the things. Abraham married his half-sister Sarah, and there was no biblical law against it. In fact, the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all of their children obviously had to intermarry. So they were marrying their cousins effectively, and there was no biblical law against it. Their genetic stock didn't have those sorts of problems that we see now. In fact, down the bottom right, you can see we get up to about 1600 BC there. Well, around 1500 BC, Moses wrote the first laws against incest, against close family marriage. So the degradation had occurred, obviously, in the genetic realm. The genes had degraded to the point where God intervened and said to Moses, no more intermarriage of close family members. And Moses himself still lived to 120 years. We get down to King David around about 1000 BC, and he lived to about the age of 70, and he had probably circulation problems. So this is showing a genetic decline, probably things like UV, maybe disease, droughts, because as Jacob says there, he had a very hard life as a shepherd, droughts and so on, and that's why he went to went to Egypt in the first place from Canaan. And it fits in very well with the fact that the past is the key to the present, not the other way around. Just one little final slide, just to show you some examples from the Sinites, that they took the same stories of the flood and Genesis, and this is some Chinese characters, and I've had Buddhist Chinese, not believers or anything, confirm that these are in fact true. You get dust, you add breath, you get two persons and you put them in an enclosure, and that in fact is the Chinese pictogram for garden. Okay, well, you've got two trees and a god in its abbreviated form, and that's forbidden. So those familiar with the biblical story would know that God forbade Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but there's also the tree of life that was there, and that was the reason he banned them from the garden in the end, so that they wouldn't eat of it. You get two trees and women, and you get this idea of coveting and desiring. And we know that Eve did in fact desire or covet the fruit. It looked good and she wanted it. How did the Chinese ever draw this as their word for covet and desire? It's very strong evidence that there is a link between the ancient Chinese and the true stories of the beginning of time. And many of our regular viewers would have heard and seen this one before. You get a vessel plus 8 people, or in fact, there's Chinese people watching, you'll know that that is probably the symbol for mouth, but same idea. 8 mouths, 8 people on a vessel is the Chinese symbol for boat. How many people were on Noah's Ark? There are 8. And we've had Chinese people come to our museum. One particular lady I remember called Caroline, who said that as a child, her Buddhist mother in China would tell her stories of a flood that destroyed the world. And she remembered being very scared as children because her mother would then say, but the next time the world's going to be destroyed by fire. And they'd be very scared. They weren't Christians or anything like that. But she moved to Australia and became a Christian. And praise God, her mother did as well. So that's a bit of some work that I've been doing in the last few weeks, getting that together as part of a talk. I hope you found it interesting. If you come back to us, please, Sam.
All right, thank you. Well, let me know if my sound is working any better for you guys in the chat. But thank you very much for that, Craig. Fantastic as always. And that really does sort of kick us off nicely for the program tonight. As you can see, we're going to be doing a few sort of shorter presentations. There'll be a program from Glenn later on and from myself. But the main bulk of this evening is going to be questions and answers. So it's good to see a whole bunch of questions that have come through into the chat in the last little while Craig has been speaking. So thank you for that. But Sam, over to you, because what we do, of course, is collect up the questions that we don't get a chance to answer on previous streams, and we deal with them once every few weeks in a program like tonight. So, Sam, over to you for our first few questions.
All right. Well, the question that I've already got up here, this came from our Easter Part 2. Doki Doki asked this question: are the authors of the Gospels anonymous?
I'm not seeing that up on this. Oh, there you are. There we go. It takes a moment. So, when was this asked? This was a few weeks ago.
This is the Easter Part 2 with the resurrection and crucifixion, dealing with sort of like the Gospels. The common argument is that we don't really know who wrote the Gospels, even though it says Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Are they anonymous? Do we know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels?
Well, we know from church tradition, what was passed down from the earliest church was that these were the authors.
And you'll also find that several, or at least 2 of them anyway, from the top of my head, of the apostles reference themselves in their Gospels, both John and Mark. John refers to himself as the one that Jesus loved, which is would be lacking humility if it wasn't true, but it was true, so that's that's all right. And Mark also refers to the one who
is the one who was running naked through the Garden of Gethsemane.
Gethsemane. At the crucifixion. I was trying to remember the details for a second. So that helps as well. Plus, also, you need to remember that many of these titles go way back into church history. So it is church tradition, but it's more than just that. It is the original documents which had the remember, these letters would have been copied down and passed from church to church, as in from gathering to gathering. So the ancient title, for instance, of Mark is according to Mark. So you sort of know that there's an association there, particularly when you find that people have been then referenced themselves in their own writings. Any other comments from the team?
Not really. Go on, Craig.
I was just going to back up what Glenn said. I think that the people in the early stages of the church would have been very familiar with who wrote them, and that's where we get the names from.
Yeah.
It's not some modern concoction.
Yeah, I mean, it's key to, when you're dealing with biblical text, you have to deal with obviously context and also textual criticism, but also as well, the church fathers are fundamental to helping us understand, what happened in the early stages of the church and also the church traditions that carry on. I mean, also as well, it's important to remember that the collection of Gospels in the New Testament wasn't formed at the Council of Nicaea; it was formed before that. And that's a common misconception that people think. They think, oh, the Council of Nicaea, they think it's a famous name, so it must have been for the Gospels. That's not the fact at all. We have sort of, there's no, I wouldn't say there's distinct, proper, 100% firm evidence that we know without a shadow of a doubt, but we can make a pretty good educated guess that the Gospels that say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Obviously, with the different Gospel authors having references to each other and also having eyewitness testimony. Well, for instance, Luke interviewing people who are actually there, and also as well we have Paul, who previously was Saul, writing in 1 Corinthians 15. That creed we can date back between 2 to 5 years after the crucifixion fairly reliably, and that is consistent with the Gospel accounts and what is proclaimed in those as well. So all of it sort of helps stack up a good case.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to say. These were written so shortly after Christ's death and resurrection that there were people around that could have, challenged and corrected.
Yeah. And in the book of Acts, it starts off with "in my former book," and we can be pretty confident that Luke was the author of Acts. So you can make these, stylistic comparisons and so on.
There's cross-referencing basically through him. So yeah.
And also as well, that in and itself, the cross-referencing is a very good argument that this is the Bible that we have today. I mean, this book here it's a compilation. It's a book that has books in it, but the fact that there's cross-referencing inside this book, in and of itself, these are 44 different authors spanning across some 1,500 years, many of whom didn't actually interact with each other, all referencing and referring to a Messiah, referencing to previous events, all cross-referencing. I've got over 63,000 different cross-references in Scripture that are just obvious, and that's not even taking into account subtext and subtle references as well. And that is a very good argument for the fact that this is a supernaturally formed book. In and of itself anyway, and it's countless times been proved to be reliable. I mean, that's why archaeologists take it on digs.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks for that, Sam. Let's have another question.
All right, okay. This one's a quick one coming from Doki Doki during this live stream. How are the stalagmites and stalactites experiments going?
Well, Craig, do you want to do your report and then I'll do my report?
Okay, yeah, I was just having a close look at it yesterday, actually, and our stalagmite's going much better than our stalactite. Must be the rate of drip or something, but for you Americans, it's currently at about 3 inches now or so, and quite thick. It's probably a good inch wide or so, probably over an inch wide, and it's got a big sort of mass spread out at the base of it as well. So it's splatting and spraying everywhere over the screen, so we have to take them down every now and again and clean them off. But yeah, it's going pretty well. Out of a 100-litre tub. So as I say to people, if we can do this, in 3 years from a 100-litre tub, imagine if we had 100,000 litres.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot more vegetation. In the UK, we've probably got about the same, roughly about 100-litre tub. Ours is the opposite. Our stalactites are doing very well. The stalagmites are just tiny little bumps on the bottom. So it must be something to do with the relative humidity in the air around, or something like that, or rate of drip or whatever. But anyway, our current stalactites are currently sitting at around 8 to 9 inches, which is pretty good for something that's only just over a year old from when we first ever set it up. So that's pretty good. They're still growing. They're still dripping. We haven't refreshed the cement. We haven't refreshed, or the only thing we have done is add a little bit extra mulch on the top from time to time, and obviously top up the water. But in terms of the main base, mineral, the concrete, the cement, it's still there. So that's really good. And in fact, we are having, now it's not next week or the week after, it's the following week. You have got this Diane and Joe Around the Museum series going out on YouTube at the moment. I think it's episode 13, I think, when that comes out, is on the Tides and Mites in the museum. So we did a whole program just on the museum experiments and some of our collections and so on and so forth. So keep an eye out for that. As to what's happening in Jurassic Ark, then you'll need to ask John when he's back, because I think he's there at the moment. So yeah.
And I'd like to add, we don't have those experiments going on in the U.S., but we have rapid fossilization by permineralization of little teddy bears. And we put one out right on the road cut, Joe. I haven't even told you this. About a month ago, we checked it this past week, about a week ago, and the one side is already fossilized. So we flipped it over to the other side. So it's going rapidly. Now that it's summertime, the process is definitely speeding up.
Good stuff. All right, let's have one more question, Sam, before we do some thank yous and then go over to Glenn.
All right, this is one from previous live stream. This came in from Who Little Old Me. Question: why do people continue to believe and preach that the Earth before the flood is the same as the Earth today, like America, Asia, Africa, Australia, etc., are now as they were then, while looking for Eden?
Yeah, I remember this when I was very, very young. I remember with, in home Bible group when I was like 7 and 8, we'd sort of sit around discussing where in the world Eden was. And we sort of were convinced that it would be in the middle of some, distant jungle, that God was still looking after the Garden of Eden, of course, completely forgetting that there's a global flood in the middle of it. I think that's the point that a lot of people forget, is that you has to go back to this program, which we do a lot of creation research, of good to bad to worse. Right? Everything was very good in the beginning. Now it's not. And that will continue getting worse and worse and worse until we get to the new heavens and the new earth. And so you need to bear in mind, as well, as you've pointed out, there's a global flood in the middle of it, which is going to split up continents. It's going to shift stuff around. It's going to drastically change things like climate and so on and so forth. And so really it's, I think, fairly pointless looking for Eden, first and foremost. That's been destroyed in the flood. We have no hope in Eden either. It's not like we could go and find the tree of life and then live forever, because let's face it, God actually put angels there to keep people away from the tree of life, and that was merciful, because who would want to spend eternity in this decrepit old body that we have at the moment? The real hope is in Jesus Christ, and it actually describes that the tree of life will be in the new heavens and the new earth. So don't go looking for Eden. It's a bit pointless, basically.
I think it's part of the same problem that where people try and explain things by what they observe in the modern world. And one of the classics, I think, is the way people try and explain scientifically the 10 plagues of Egypt. And they try and say, oh, look, there's blood, red,
solar eclipse, or
whatever,
bloom, or whatever. Yeah. There's no doubt about it that God can use natural things to bring about supernatural judgment. But you have to recognize that the origins of that is a supernatural thing. The flood was a very physical thing, right? Yes. It was a very physical judgment. But when we go and start looking for the evidence of it, what triggered the flood? Was it meteors crashing into the earth? Was it this? Was it that? Well, they're all interesting ideas, but the reality is, don't become too scientific over it, because it is a supernatural judgment. This is a all-supreme being judging the world for their sin. So there's a spiritual aspect to the judgment as well. It brought about in a very physical way, but we need to bear in mind that this is a supernatural judgment, and creation is a supernatural creation. And so, yes, while there is a very physical element to creation, i.e. things are coming into existence, right? Be wary of trying to explain how things come into existence purely naturally, because we don't need to go there, right? It's a supernatural creation. That's the whole point. So,
I noticed there's a million questions coming through. We ought to time ourselves, do 1 minute answers and just bang them out.
Just bang them out. Yeah. Well, let's have one more quick question. Let's see if we can do the challenge. Let's have one quick question from tonight, Sam, before we go on to Glenn.
All right. Okay. Let's do this one's a quick one. Here we go. 1 minute on the clock. Did giraffes evolve a tall neck to reach high branches?
No.
There we go. We've set a world record, folks.
On a serious, very brief and serious note, you have to. There is a genuine belief that this is how giraffes got their long necks, because you have the okapi, which is in the same kind of grouping as a giraffe, probably the same created kind, which has a long neck for its size, but it's not a giraffe's long neck. And the argument is that whatever original ancestor of these just continued to keep stretching and stretching and stretching until eventually it passes information on to its offspring. Problem with this, of course, is that doesn't really work, because you don't pass on information like that to your offspring. You have to create new information in the genome, which we've never seen happen naturally. It's always been done artificially, right? And so then you're like, well, okay, how would you actually get a new trait? Well, you can't. So perhaps you've got a load of short-necked giraffes that happen to produce a long-necked giraffe, and that was the only one that survives. And so it becomes ridiculous very quickly, particularly when you look at exactly how well designed the giraffe's long neck is, right? Now, well, the chances are is that there were no giraffes as we know of them today on Noah's Ark, right? Because the okapi seems to be in the same created kind. But one thing you know for sure, the ability to have a long neck and the ability for all of the function of a long neck, all of that information existed in whatever original kind that God created. Just like all the information for all the different skin colors in humans, eye shapes, facial features, the same way you get all the different features that you see in dogs, from the wolf all the way down to the pug, is all present in that original created kind. That's information, and that's a design. And so that's where it had to have come from in the first place, was from a God who is the Word, who actually put that information in there with that ability to produce a long giraffe neck. All right, leave it at that. Cool. All right, Sam, maybe a quick thank yous, and then Glenn, over to you.
All right. Well, we've got Doki Doki coming in swinging with 2 US buckaroos, a pair character turning around, waving his hand, saying, "Hey, you," while lowering his glasses. Hey, you. We've got Doki Doki again coming in with 99 US centaurs, smiling face with sunglasses. You have to do that. There we go. We've also got as well, I think we've got another one somewhere down here. Super chat from Neil Grinley for 10 British buckaroos. God bless you, Neil. Thank you so much. Doki Doki coming in again with 149 US buckaroos. A hamburger. Thank you so much. I am a little bit hungry. I might have to go.
Neil's been on fire with his questions tonight.
Yeah. Doki Doki again for 149 US buckaroos, 3 evergreen trees. And I think that is about that's about it for the time being.
I think what we'll do when we come back from Glenn, I think we'll try your idea, Craig, of doing a few quick fire questions. Maybe just go around the team, take a question at a time, and just bang out a quick answer. Might even be able to make a few YouTube shorts out of it, which are always very popular. So anyway, we'll come back to that in a little bit. Keep your questions coming. That's great. Yes, I know that, Neil, I know that the pictures of the kids' pictures have giraffes coming out of the roof. I suspect we need to upgrade your picture storybooks. But anyway, Glenn, over to you.
All right, I'm sharing my screen now. I wanted to just give you a little bit of a ministry update. What I've been working on, making changes, improvements, hopefully, to the Creation Research USA website. That's creationresearchusa.org. One of the things I added in was a section on the current research and more recent type research. So you could go to our website, look for the button that says more about our research. And one of the items I shared was about, well, what's going to go on for the next 2 days for me. And that is looking for fossil short teeth. My wife and I love going out into streams and finding short teeth. These are individual pictures from individual trips that we've made. So we find quite a few when we go out. And what we've mostly done is going into streams in North Mississippi, because that's where we lived. It wasn't that far of a distance from our home. And the way we would do it is just dig the sediment up from the bottom and sieve it. Now, these streams are about 300 miles from the coast, 430 feet above sea level. So they're nowhere close to the coast. and yet we're able to find shark teeth, but we find much more. Here's just from one sieve where we found an arrowhead, and the one in my hand is a tiger shark, and one in Ruby's hand is a sand shark. And so it's just a lot of fun getting out there. But we find more than shark teeth. We find alligator teeth, turtle scutes, mosasaur teeth, ray quills. We find the teeth of the little fish that eat the coral. But we also find just a various array of animal bones that are fossilized that we really can't identify. But in all cases, we find this mixed environment of oceanic animals with land animals in this. So it's just a lot of fun. But we've gone to other places. This is pictures of us in black waters of the Peace River in Florida. Now, the interesting thing about finding shark teeth in this area, it's black water, so you can't see down in the water very good. And they have alligators in it, and it's fast flowing with down logs, as you can see. So just an interesting story. You know, growing up in Louisiana, I'm not too scared of alligators, but I know to be careful. And one of the things that frogs, I love going frogging in the swamps in Louisiana. Joe saw me hand grab frog there right next to a couple of alligators that we had just seen. But what the frogs do is they hide behind branches that go out over the water, so that if the alligator comes in, it's going to hit the branches and they know to get out of there. So as we were digging shark teeth, I would always take the shovel after digging up a couple of shovelfuls into the sieve, and I'd set it between me and Ruby and the main body of the river. So in case alligator came up, he'd bump that shovel and I'd know to get out the water. Well, at one point we were sieving, and I told Ruby, I said, Ruby, get up on the bank. She's like, why? I need to be able to, sieve this. I was like, get up on the bank. Oh, there was something that had come up and went back under right behind us. So we got up on the bank, and it turned out it was a duck. So anyway, yes, we find shark teeth all over America. And even in Kansas, we found shark teeth at this location. We went out on a dig with David Reeves, and we found shark teeth 1,000 miles, more than 1,000 miles from the coast, and over 1,000 feet above sea level, which, the secular geologists will say, well, they were localized, higher oceans at one time. Well, yes, it's called the flood to cover the entire earth. But one thing we've never found is a megalodon tooth. And this is Joe speaking at First Baptist Church in Dallas. And he was using a megalodon tooth to make a presentation. And one of the things that our director, John, has emphasized is it's always beneficial to have objects, to have fossils in your hands that you've dug up and you're an eyewitness to it, that you found this. And I think for megalodon teeth, we've had to rely on ones that we've bought or cast of ones, because I've never found a megalodon tooth, and I've gone out looking for them, and they're getting more difficult to find. But the most common place to find them is in those streams like the one I showed you, blackwater streams with alligators, fast flowing, and you have to scuba dive for them. So I've taken the first 2 steps of getting certified, and tomorrow and Sunday, I will be going to doing my first open water dive. I say my first open water dive. I actually went scuba diving off the Great Barrier Reef and loved it, but Ruby didn't care for it too much. So pray for me. I go to get my certification, and then plans are to go scuba diving in those blackwater rivers looking for megalodon teeth, because that is the highest probability, from what I understand, of finding them, is to go into those areas, probably because there aren't too many people that want to go into them. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll go back to you, Sam.
All right.
Great
Thank you
stuff.
very much for that, Graham.
Just before we last night when I was driving over to my speaking engagement, I was listening to an article on the ABC radio about the fact that in the alligator farms in Louisiana, 100% of all the alligator farms only feed vegetable matter to the alligators. It's an extruded soy pellet or something. So, which backs up the fact that they were originally created to eat plant material.
Awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Thank you for that. And yes, we shall do some more questions now and perhaps do some quick fire round questions. So, Sam, over to you to throw some things in our direction.
All right, then. Doki Doki asked this question. Why did the most dangerous wildlife find their way to Australia?
Well, you're the Australian, Craig.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily know the answer to that. Although there's plenty of dangerous creatures along the way. If you look at the cobra snake in India and lots of deadly spiders and so on in South America and so on. So I think the premise of the question is probably not completely true. And we don't have bears, right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of dangerous creatures around the world. We certainly have our fair share of snakes, that's for sure. And who knows, perhaps some of the environmental conditions and the devolution, if you like, of the snakes from probably the one created kind, I'm assuming, one or two created kinds, has occurred in that way. But, yeah, we don't have all the dangerous animals by any means. We don't have wolves either.
It could be that, the timing of by the time that they got there, because, if they started from the ark and it's where we think it started, as you showed in your dispersion pictures, they're devolving as they are migrating and moving into that area. And I imagine a lot of it is, like you said, they have the genetics, but when you get into the extreme environments of Australia, you're going to see those variations come out, those distinctions.
Yeah. And so it's more to do with what can end up surviving there rather than what evolved there or ended up there in the first place. And a lot of the dangerous things in Australia, if you take the sort of the reptiles out of the equation, most of the dangerous things are the sort of the small bitey type things, which is, again, down to environmental and a breakdown of food chains. So,
yeah, most of our scorpions, for example, are not deadly dangerous like some of the ones in, for example, the Middle East, and none of our mammals and not many vertebrates, except maybe the crocs, are dangerous at all.
But the most dangerous animal of all was sent there, right? The prisoners that were sent to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I blame Steve Irwin for sort of publicising all the danger. Oh, crikey, look at this dangerous creature over here. I'm going to touch it with a stick. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm on a croc. Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. Another question, Sam. Let's go.
All right. Another quick question. Douglas Boffey asked, what was gopher wood?
We don't know.
Don't know.
I thought it was Noah said to his sons, go for the wood.
Yeah. It's a mistranslation. Yeah, no. No, honestly, we don't know. There's been suggestions from everything from sort of various pine trees to all sorts of other stuff. Pine because it's sort of lightweight, but also full of pitch, which is helpful to be waterproof. But at the end of the day, we don't know. It's all speculation.
So I'll have a question to reply back. What is plywood? It's a form of way that it's processed, and it could very well be as well with gopher wood. It's a way of processing it.
Yeah.
Or it could have been just an ancient name for a tree that we don't use anymore because we use a different system of classification.
Yeah.
Or that. Yeah.
Don't know.
We don't know, basically. Have fun. Right. Next one. This one comes in from Doki Doki Bible Club. Have you ever seen the Loch Ness Monster?
Have any? I don't suppose.
Personally, I haven't. No.
Have any of you been to Loch Ness?
I have. Yes.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been there. No, I haven't seen it. On the subject of Loch Ness, just very quickly, what's interesting is if you go back through history, you'll find that the sightings of Loch Ness as in the sort of the weird sort of, snaky type creature, that really started soon after the Second World War, as in the resurgence of it. And it all started with that famous sort of fake photo, the one that looks like an elephant's trunk sticking out of the water. If you go backwards enough in time, however, particularly to the old Celtic times, sort of, Roman and pre-Roman times, when you had the different clans and tribes up at the top of Scotland, they did have stories and accounts rather of of a large beast that lived in the loch, and the description of it was much more along the lines of the dragon, plesiosaur, pliosaur type of creature living in there. That story was believed to be real. That story was believed to have been an actual an account, and then it basically stopped. The stories stopped, and they stopped for hundreds of years until post Second World War. Scotland needed some tourism, and so they started the stories up again, basically from this ancient myth. So there was a strong likelihood of there being something in the loch at some point in the past. The chances of something being in the loch today is very, very slim, but it does, of course, get people there and looking, and yay for tourism. Lots of people have claimed to have seen it, but there's really been no substantial evidence, and particularly when you think about the last 20 years, the volume of people visiting has gone up, and the volume of people visiting with some kind of portable camera device has gone up as well. So the chances of any evidence is going further and further down. But there we are. Let's have another question, Sam.
All right. Do you want another quick fire one?
Go for it.
All right. Cool beans. Douglas Buffett asked this question: will the human genome be restored in the millennium?
I suspect some of it must be, for sure.
Of course. Well, yeah, at this point, we're going into the more eschatological interpretations, which, of course, there are many different views of the millennium, depending on whether you are pre, post, A, or something else. I think that there has to be ultimately, we have to go back to the realization of God as a sovereign God and his ability to hold things together. It says in Colossians 1:16 that not only was all things made by Christ, but all things were made for Jesus Christ, and in Jesus Christ all things currently consist. In other words, all things are currently held together by Christ. And so there's a sustaining power of Christ that is happening today, and will happen going forward in the future, and has happened ever since the beginning of time. And so however you wish to interpret the millennium, the one thing you have to come to a recognition of is that Jesus Christ is the one who holds all things together, yesterday, today, and forever. And so whatever happens, trust in the knowledge that he will be the one who will continue to hold things together and continue to restore you. And ultimately, our big picture ought to be looking beyond the millennium into the time when we are in a new heavens and a new earth, when all things will be restored completely. No need to hold things together in that sense anymore, because things will be completely restored in perfection. So any other comments from the team before we move on?
Well, there's also as well, you've got to look at the sort of this, there's the spiritual body side of things. So obviously people who have passed away before the coming back of Christ, because it said there's a differentiation between people who survive the tribulation and are reunited with Christ, and those who come down with Christ to essentially judge and to see, it will see on the great white throne of judgment, will judge angels and things like that. Well, because we are given new bodies in heaven, spiritual bodies. Who's to say we will have a human genome for a spiritual body? I would probably hazard a guess, probably not, because it's a spiritual body, not a made up of DNA and things like that. But we don't necessarily know. There's a whole bunch of different viewpoints, and again, it does, like Joe said, it does depend on your eschatological viewpoint, and how you interpret certain things. If there is a human genome, then I would probably bet my I don't really have a hat. I'd probably eat a hat if I had one. If there wasn't any restoration of the human genome, considering how much corruption and destruction we already have, for instance, with cancer and things like that.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? In Isaiah 65, which is generally looked at as an eschatological passage, it says,
it's a difficult
never again,
word, isn't it, Craig? It's a
it
difficult
is.
word.
Yeah, I just stumbled over that. But it says, never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child. The one who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. Now, if the current genetic situation remains, then that seems very, very strange that could be true. I would think, to answer the question directly, there has to be some level of restoration in the millennium if you hold to the millennium view. Yeah, but that Isaiah 65 is pretty well widespread, looked at as a future view of the earth, and certainly that hasn't been the case up until this point since Isaiah wrote it. So that seems to be certainly something that'll happen in the future.
Good stuff. All right, let's go for another question.
All right. Who little old me asked this question? Was Hitler a Christian? It's Q&A week, folks.
Yes. You know, we're told not to judge, but then we're also told you'll know them by their fruits.
Yeah.
So what was the fruits of Hitler? I think it would be safe to say no, but it's not for us to decide. But obviously, looking from a person from the outside, no.
And so, Hitler had a lot of very interesting quotes regarding Christianity, but the one thing that seemed to be consistent throughout all of it, because a lot of it seemed to be in favor of Christianity, and some of it, but we're doing the Lord's work and this and that and the other. Obviously very confused about what Christianity meant, but the one thing that's consistent throughout it, and this is where it becomes interesting, is that most of it seemed to be in support of the Catholic Church. It certainly seemed to be more his relationship with Christianity as an organized religion rather than a true born-again Christianity seemed to be more of a political thing rather than a religious or a personal sort of born again Christian type thing as we would understand Christianity today. So don't necessarily listen to those who claim that Christianity is what fueled Hitler, because if you dig down into things like Mein Kampf, which is his story, most of which fueled his things was hatred as opposed to actual Christian values, so to speak. But
there's just no way he was a Christian. Jesus
Ultimately.
Christ is the author and perfecter of our faith, and he says, whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. And Hitler didn't obey his commands, certainly about do not kill, love your enemies, etc., etc.
There's also as well the curse placed on Canaan in Genesis has been used historically to excuse things like racism and sort of degrading different sort of groups as well. I mean, there's a whole sort of bunch of different avenues you can sort of go down with this question. If you want to have a good read of this topic, I do recommend that Ray Comfort has a book about it, Hitler, God and the Bible. It basically exposes Adolf Hitler's theology and abuse, essentially, of religion to further his political agenda and getting power, essentially. But I would say, yes, you know them by their fruits, and his fruits were not very ripe.
Well, what's interesting, just very briefly commenting on that little section you did there, Sam, the sort of the curse of Canaan being used as an excuse for racism. What you'll find is that most of the time it's not the curse of Canaan that's used for the excuse, it's the curse of Ham. Of course, you can't find the curse of Ham in the Bible because it's only the curse of Canaan. So sometimes it's not just that a particular concept or statement in the scripture is being used falsely, it's that something has been made up entirely in order to excuse sin. So be careful about what information you're looking into.
Well, if you look at that dispersal diagrams that I did, that Canaan wasn't really probably the father of the black Africans anyway. It was more likely Cush and Mizraim and so on.
Yeah, and that's why they had to go back to the curse of Ham, and yet there has been no curse of Ham. It was cursed be Canaan. So, yeah, it's all messed up. Anyway, let's have another question, and then I'll have a little section before we carry on.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted, yeah.
I am muted, yes, that would help. Douglas Boffey has asked this question. Did Darwin recant?
Well, we actually have an answer on the Q&A site, askjohnmackay.com, and I wrote an answer to it at some point. I think the one that's up there is one that Diane did. Basically, in a nutshell, and I'll let the other comments. Number one, we don't know the heart of a man just before he dies. There is an opportunity for salvation right up to the point of death, and then it ends. So we do not know what happened on those last final moments. Now, the story of Darwin recanting all of his life's work and giving his life to Christ ultimately started from a lady who claimed to have been there at the time that Darwin died and heard him recant, and then started spreading the information. A few quick problems. Number one, the family of Darwin who was there, because Darwin sort of suffered a heart attack and then died a few days later. The family was all there, and none of them saw this lady, or said that this lady was never present at any point. She also didn't come up with the story until about 2 to 3 years after Darwin died. So there's a few sort of suspicious things about the story, nonetheless. And regardless of all of that, and really the evidence is that the story of Darwin recanting isn't accurate or isn't true. Regardless of all of that, even if he did, other than that being wonderful, it doesn't really make any difference. It should never. I've seen it being used as an argument of, oh well, therefore we can dismiss, Darwinian evolution, because even Darwin recanted from it. Well, the reality is what Darwin did, which is really base or popularize a very, very old and ancient idea. What he did affected the church so much and Western society so much that it is something that needs to be dealt with today, which is why creation research does what creation research does. Dismissing it purely on a story that Darwin recanted is irrelevant at the end of the day. Any comments, guys?
No. Very good.
Yeah, and also as well, we can. Is also that's a good sort of analogy as to why eyewitness testimony is so important. Even just sort of 2 to 3 years later, we have this story spreading of Darwin recanting, and the people, the eyewitnesses who were there, have said, no, we don't remember seeing this woman. She wasn't there. This is completely false. X, Y, Z, and this is a good sort of mirror, as it were, to how we can rely on the Gospels, because this was all eyewitness testimony and it's been recorded down, and the Jewish people were sticklers for details and recounting things accurately, recounting things accurately, as well as talking about things with reference to other people, like for instance Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says there are 500 witnesses, many of whom are still alive today. Essentially, go and ask them and they'll back you up with saying what I'm saying is true. So they were all sort of interlinking with each other, talking to each other, and they all knew what was going on, essentially with Jesus and reciting these the memories of Christ and what he preached, but people would see it from different viewpoints, which is why we have slight variations in the different gospel accounts, but this is consistent with eyewitness testimony as we know it today anyway.
It's just incredible how widespread this idea is about Darwin recanting. I was actually asked it last night at the engagement I was at last night, and it's really widespread, right across the Western world, it seems. And I think it's a little bit like the goldfish story. The goldfish has only got 5-second memory. Everyone seems to know that, at least in Australia, and yet it's false.
Yeah. The other one that everybody sort of knows about is we only use 10% of our brain, and it's nonsense. At the end of the day, I think the closest you can trace that back to is that a group of scientists in an interview once said we only know what about 10% of the brain does. And so that ended up being misconstrued, which they were basically saying the brain is so complex, we're still struggling to understand it. But that was misconstrued into we only use 10% of our brain, which is nonsense. All of our brain is active and working at different parts. And in fact, if you go back, we've done this before with brain drain programs, right? If you look at humans in the past with bigger brains, more neurons, more ability to be able to make connections, and more intelligence. So there's all sorts
I look around the world, Joe, and I dispute that. I don't think people use their brains much at all.
Well, okay, well, yeah, well. Right, let me do our little section now, and then we'll come back to some questions. But just a short little bit, again, talking about some science and classification and some interesting bits, as well as what we've been doing over the last little while. So if you make sure my slides are up and ready, Sam, that'd be great. And you should be able to see on the screen there some of our volunteers working in the museum. We're finally at the point in the UK Museum where we are getting the upstairs area ready and set out so that it is self-guiding as people go round. And you can see we're working on, the volunteers there are working on a brand new living fossils display, which will be the first ever thing that you see as you come into the museum, because we're going to start downstairs with Lyell and Darwin. You know, the man who rewrote the story of the rocks and the man who rewrote the story of life. And as you come up the stairs, you'll be presented with a display on living fossils, which obviously challenge both of those. The story of the rocks, because they are, of course, rocks and they have no evidence of deep time or evolution in them at all. As you go around, you'll then start to get onto the dinosaur area, which you can see we're starting to set up there with the great big dinosaur on the wall and all the bones and stuff in the display case, which is all very exciting, including this particular bone. If my slide will actually work. Is that working, Sam?
Yeah, that's all good.
Good stuff. Okay, here's a bone which I was working on today. This isn't actually a dinosaur bone, although we have done the same thing to some dinosaur bones. This is a crocodilian bone. It's a crocodilian bone from a place called Orton Pit, which is in Peterborough in the east of the UK. And, well, it's an ancient crocodile bone from the Jurassic rocks there, and it's supposed to be around 200 million years old, or really 199 million years old, give or minus 3 million years. So somewhere around the 200 million year old mark. Now, what I've been doing today is drilling a big hole in it. And the reason I've been doing that is to collect all of the powder, because that powder will then become part of the sample set, which we will test in the next couple of weeks, not only for things like collagen. This has already shown up positive for there being organics inside of it, using a process called FTIR, Fourier Transform Infrared Spectroscopy, if you want to know the full name of the equipment. But we will also be doing some testing for collagen and then some proteomic analysis. In other words, actually analyzing the proteins inside of it. Now, we're going to do this with two other samples as well. One large iguanodon vertebrae that we dug up from the Isle of Wight a few years back, and also a big Apatosaurus rib bone, which I brought back from the US on my last trip. But the crocodile one here is particularly exciting for me because, well, you see, we're going to go ahead with proteomic research, analysis, right? In other words, if we can come back with it being analyzed as being shown to be a crocodilian protein inside, or even a reptilian protein inside would be good enough for me, but especially crocodilian, the real challenge then is, or the real thing that it shows is that the chances of this protein being contamination, which is obviously one of the big challenges and the big criticisms that we get in this research, the chances of it being contamination is very slim, because the chances of a crocodile contaminating this bone in Peterborough in England is fairly low. And so it's very sort of exciting research that we're getting into at the moment. So do pray for this over the next few couple of weeks, really, as we do this. But it just sort of, again, goes to show how vital the museum ministry is, as well as the research and being able to hold these fossils and do the research in on it. On my birthday as well, I found a brand new fossil site. This is actually in Shrewsbury Museum. They have a new geology of Shropshire area, which I'd not seen before. And we found about a brand new place, which is only about 20 minutes away from where I live, where these large polystrate trees have been found. And I've managed to track them down on the geology map. And so very soon we're going to go and see if we can find where these are being held and where they were originally found, and see, of course, if we can find any more. So I think a bit of a road trip is in order fairly soon. But again, polystrate trees, we've made the point of these before, right? They cut up through many, many layers. You can see the huge tree there, and the bark is still there. We found these kind of things in the US as well. So all very exciting. All right, brief little bit. I want to talk about classification and science and the science of creation and all that kind of stuff. And we start with a program which we've done several times before. Who said this? Beware of false science, it leads you astray. That's the sort of paraphrase, right? But it's actually in the Bible. It's in, well, let's see if you can guess where it is if we put up the actual Bible verse. Timothy, keep that which is committed to your trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred according to the faith. This is in your old King James Bible, because yes, this is in 1 Timothy 6 verse 20, and the paraphrase that Paul is telling Timothy is, beware of false science, it will lead you astray. And yes, the old King James does use that word science. It's the old word for knowledge. Science and knowledge mean the same thing. Beware of false science, beware of false knowledge. It will lead you astray. The point? False knowledge will lead you away from Christ. True knowledge will point you towards Christ. So make sure you have some true knowledge. Okay, the world's first scientific classification, an journal article, a paper published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, if not the most prestigious scientific journal, a few years back, talked about the world's first scientific classification. This is what they had to say. The earliest case of systematic naming occurred about 6,000 years ago, when God brought all his newly fashioned creatures to Adam to see what he would call them. Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. You see, people do accept this sometimes, and you know the story of God sending the animals to Adam to name them. It was one of the first roles that Adam had to do, was actually classify their things, followed shortly by naming his wife and then tending the garden. Okay, even Nature are admitting that the earliest case of naming, systematic naming, was Adam, when he had to name the animals. Okay, well, let's see if we can get a little bit more scientific with it then. Who invented the modern concept of genus and species? If you know your modern classification system, the modern taxonomic system, it's got a binomial system, binomial nomenclature it's called. It's a two naming system. We have genus and species. Genus being like, for instance, put it into our kind of classification, Homo, species being sapien, put it into the dog, right? Canis is the genus, Lupus is the species. It's a two naming system. All right. Well, who actually invented this system? The answer, Carl von Linné, or Carl Linnaeus, as he's often known. There he is there. Set it up a few years ago, and how did he actually come to this conclusion, or this classification system of actually naming things according to genus and species? Well, the answer is in Genesis 1:11. You see, in Genesis 1:11, it says, God commanded the earth to bring forth plants, each after their own kind. You see, in your English Bible, that word kind there is found, but in the old Hebrew, it's min. And you see, this word in English is kind, this word in Hebrew is min. But if you go to your Latin Vulgate Bible and you have a look, can you see there's verse 11, and it's all in Latin, right? I wonder how many of our viewers today can read Latin, but have a look at what it says there. You see what's highlighted in red? Genus. You see, this word genus is what the Hebrew word min is, and what in English is kind. And in fact, you can actually go to the Septuagint, which is a Greek, and you can see the same word there, genus. You see, in Genesis 1 chapter 11, the English word is kind, the Hebrew word is min, but the Greek and the Latin name is genus. Okay, so what is a kind? Well, the word kind is from the Old English kin, as in related to each other, but not related to a non-kin or separate group, for instance, mankind, king's men, or indeed Dawkins. It's all from the same root word. You see, if you want a biblical sense, bird kind was originally created separately and unrelated to the fish kind or any other kind, but according to the theory of evolution, birds are related to all things, and particularly from the reptiles from which they supposedly evolved from. Right, you know, dinosaurs to birds? Interesting. Okay, well, here's your origin of bears according to the theory of evolution. A fish all by itself grew legs and evolved into an amphibian, which given enough time evolved scales and ended up as a reptile, which given enough time evolved into a mammal-like reptile called a snapsid, which eventually evolved into an actual mammal, which you can see there, which eventually evolved into the common ancestor of all bears. And from there you get polar bears, black bears, and brown bears, and so on and so forth. You see, according to the Bible, God created things according to their kind. And so there was one original bear kind, and from that kind, you end up with all the diversity that we see today. Variation within a kind. I mean, if you want to put it in a biblical perspective, God says that he made Adam and Eve, and from Adam and Eve, all people are descended. All the human races, all the different cultures, all the different ethnicities, all the different skin colors, all the different eye shades, they're all from Adam. In fact, they all go back to Noah. In fact, it specifically says in after the flood that it's from Noah's 3 sons that all nations and tribes and races have actually descended from. And is there any is there any scientific backing to this biblical picture? Because I hope you realize that one of these, well, let's go back actually to our bear here. You realize that only one half of this picture has actually been observed. We've never seen a fish turn into an amphibian, or an amphibian turn into a reptile, or a reptile turn into a mammal, or even one type of mammal even turn into a bear. We have, however, seen lots of examples of variation within its kind. So Nature, again, prestigious journal, a few years back, bacteria kind. You see, here's a load of pictures of bacteria. But these bacteria are rather interesting because you see these bacteria are actually fossil bacteria. These microfossils, these bacteria fossils, were found in a 3,235 million year old. I mean, that's like nearly over 3 billion years old. In fact, there's the fossil bacteria, there's the modern one. You see, there's no doubt about it, these bacteria have continued to reproduce after their own kind, and even after 3 billion supposed years, they're still filamentaceous bacteria. You see, Stephen Jay Gould, who was an evolutionist, but a very honest one, actually said our ability to classify both living and fossil species distinctly and using the same criteria fits splendidly with creationist tenets. It really does. And you see, our aim is to show that there are plenty of opinions and theories that disagree with the Bible, but the facts never actually do. And just to finish off the point very quickly, if you come back to me, Sam, Carl Linnaeus, when he actually lifted this classification system straight out of scripture, it was simply because he was reading his Latin Bible. You see, he believed that God had created the world, and he also believed that God had created the world with living things that had been created according to their kind. And so he simply said, well, if that's the case, I'm going to base my entire classification system around this idea of a created kind. Of course, in the Latin Vulgate Bible, the Bible that Carl Linnaeus was reading, that word was genus. So you take genus out and put it into your classification system at the core of your classification system, because according to Carl Linnaeus, everything above that was just his way of organizing it on paper, right? You know, kingdom, phylum, order, class, family. Well, now you see, you have it centered around this idea of genus and species, and Carl Linnaeus recognized that God had created things according to their kind, so he centers it around genus, which is the old Latin word for kind, which is then in our English translations as kind, but he recognized that within a kind you do certainly get variation. You get special types of that kind, and that's where we get our word species from. It's from the same root word as the word special. It's a special type within that kind, and so there you have it, a classification system based around a biblical principle which is still in effect today. And yes, our point is to show that there are many ideas, hypotheses, opinions, and theories that disagree with every single part of the Bible, but the facts never actually do. And if you do what QnA did, and you actually start with a biblical perspective, things begin to fit in much, much nicer. Well, back to you guys and the team. A little interesting thing to run through there. If I can get off of this, there we go. And come back to you, and we'll finish up tonight with a few more questions.
All right. So we will do this one here. Who little old me? What do you guys make of the Giants playground in the southern parts of Africa? Was it built by actual giants?
Well, we have a similar thing to the Giants playground here in England, down in the south sort of Exmoors and Bodmin Moors, where you have these huge sort of round stones that from a distance look like they're balanced on top of each other like a child's, stacking toy. When you get up closer, we will realize that these stones are still actually connected to each other, so they haven't actually ended up being fully eroded away. And so you'll find several of these ideas of the Giants playgrounds around the world, including, I think it's in Namibia, that the one in the southern part of Africa is. If you get up close, the one from a distance, they certainly look like big building blocks, right, that you put together. But when you actually go and look at geology, these are sandstone blocks a lot of the time. Sometimes they're granitic rocks. But when you go and look at them in situ, if you like, in a big wall face, you'll find that there are lots and lots of bands of softer rocks that are running through them. Now, if you expose these to the right elements, the softer rock simply gets destroyed, and you end up with these big blocks that look like they're now sitting on top of each other. So they're certainly not the playgrounds of giants. These would have had to have been impossibly large giants to be able to actually be so. But we are just dealing with a really unique phenomena with erosion.
Now, biblically, yes, there were giants, but you look at the Bible and these were about 10 feet tall. That's not going to do you much good for being able to pick up these rocks. No. And if you're going to have to use physics, which I think many of the structures were made with, I've got an interesting story for you. When I was at the Desert Research Institute, we participated in this citywide competition, and there was different sports. Well, one of the sports, and keep in mind, I worked for the Desert Research Institute, a collection of scientists. I was like the most stout scientist in the group. But one of the sports was tug of war. We dominated at tug of war. We would win every year. And the newspaper came out and asked us how. Well, you can get a whole lot more skinny, small people onto a tug of war rope than you can big people. And so we would take on the weightlifting clubs, and we would beat them because, 12 or 13 little people was much better than 8 giant people. You didn't need giants to build these structures. You just need
lots of little people. Yeah.
And you needed some brains and you needed skill, and the more people you put on the ropes, the better.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, let's have another question, Sam.
All right. This one comes in from Douglas Boffey. Question: if God confused the languages at Babel, is it wrong to learn a foreign language? I would argue no, because you just simply look at the book of Acts, because God bestows the gift of tongues, of talking in different languages to the disciples so they can go into the entire world and preach the gospel.
Yes. I think it's a real gift to be able to learn other languages, and it's a gift to be able to use the gift of tongues, just to be able to communicate.
I think from a biblical perspective, we're commanded to go out as Christians into all the world and preach the gospel. Yes. And that's hard to do if you don't speak the same language as the people you're trying to speak to. So,
well, if no one did that, then you wouldn't have the word of God in English.
Exactly. Yes.
Let alone Latin.
Yeah. All right, let's have maybe one or two more questions before we wrap stuff up. We've only got about 4 more minutes.
There's a question that's sort of been thought up by a very handsome man, I don't know who he is. Question comes
I
in
was
from
going to say,
Sam Jenkins. I don't know who.
right, yeah.
So this is sort of something I've sort of been coming across online. I thought it'd be good to sort of address this. How do we respond to those, so Unitarianism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, that object to Jesus being God? Specifically, they use verses like John 20:17, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. John 14:28, my Father is greater than I. And Luke 18:19, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone.
Well, the first thing to do is to tune in about 4 weeks' time when we have a specific topic on the triunity of God, which will include the deity of Christ. So that's the first thing. But third, open to you guys to comment. We'll maybe go around and make a few comments each before we close up.
Yeah, well, the first thing that jumps into my mind with this particular subject is the fact that Jesus was a man on earth. He was physically a man, and he's always referencing that fact when he's making these comments. He was a man, and he's the Son of God as a born person on this planet. It doesn't mean that he's denying the fact that he was God or anything. He's basically framing his current situation, if you like, as a physical man on a physical earth. And that's how I think you read the context of those passages.
Yeah, I think context is really key. Jesus says, why do you call me good? There's no one is good except for God alone. You realize that Jesus isn't actually contradicting himself at this point. He's actually asking a question, right? A rich young ruler has come up to him and said, good master. And Jesus is saying, genuine question, why are you asking me, why are you calling me good? There is none good except for God alone. Right now, Jesus, of course, is God, and really what he was trying to do is get the rich young ruler to think about where his priorities are, because by implication, if there's none good but God, the rich young ruler wasn't good either. And this was the whole point that Jesus was trying to get across. It's not Jesus telling the man off for calling him good, it's challenging him at where his presuppositions are. And you see the end result of this is, well, if you want to do good, go and sell all your possessions and follow me. And he didn't do that, right? Just highlighting the point that he wasn't good, the rich young ruler, that is. So you need to take all these things into context, particularly when you see Jesus interacting with other people. The number one thing that Jesus does if he gets challenged is to ask a question to get them to think about why they are actually challenging him. He does that with the Pharisees, he does that with the scribes, he does that with the Sadducees when there was arguments over the afterlife and so on and so forth. It's getting them to challenge where they're actually coming from. So yeah, context I think is probably the biggest thing.
And he also says, I and the Father are one.
Yes.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Yeah.
Yes.
And also as well, there's I referred to this on the Easter program, part 2. I did a presentation, but it's worth sort of repeating. When Jesus is facing the Sanhedrin in Mark 14, verses 61 to 64 provide a brilliant sort of response to this. And it's also worthwhile remembering this because it's the earliest gospel, which Muslims tend to prefer. It says, but he kept silent and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him, saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am, full stop. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. This is obviously referring to the Daniel 7 vision. And then the high priest tore his clothes and said, what further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. So they clearly understood the scripture, clearly understood that he was calling himself God.
And again, elsewhere, you'll find that the Pharisees, first of all, wanted to kill Jesus because he worked on the Sabbath. But then when they challenged him about working on the Sabbath, he said, well, my father's been working and I've been working. And it then says that the Pharisees, these are the people, the highest level of lawyers in the country, right, who studied the law and knew the law inside out. They then wanted to kill him because he was calling himself God, right? So they says in the scriptures they sought to kill him all the more. So the highest graded lawyers in the country recognized that he was calling himself God, which is why they wanted to kill him. So it's exactly, it's just as well, might as well said, I am God, which is effectively what he was doing. He did the same in the first time that Jesus preached in the synagogue as well. He basically did the same thing. He equated himself with God.
And in Luke, he's not denying that he is God. He says no one is good except for God alone. And so, he's asking the guy, do you recognize me
As
really,
God.
as God.
Yeah.
Because he is good.
Yeah. All right, folks, we do need to call this to a close and wrap this up now. So thank you very much for joining us. Sam, do we have any final thank yous?
We do indeed. So we shall, hang on, let me just remove that from the screen. We'll do these thank yous here. Make sure I haven't missed any thank yous here. That's all good. So we've got 199 US Buckaroos from Doki Doki coming in for 199 US Buckaroos. An open eye with the word sneak peek. I'm guessing that's sort of like that. And then Doki Doki again for 2 US Buckaroos. Hands doing a fist bump. Boom. And then we've got Douglas Boffey coming in with 2 British Buckaroos. Pair character doing a shake sign with his hand saying cool. No, Shaka sign is saying cool. I think it's like that. That's the one, I think. And then we also have Iron Matt coming with 4 US Buckaroos. Pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Thank you so much, Iron Matt. God bless you. And Doki again coming in with 99 US Centaurs. A drooling face. I'm not going to drool on the stream, but you can probably imagine a drool sort of coming down from my face there.
I'm just I'm just going to do one last question, if that's all right. That's just come in from Iron Matt. Because it's an interesting question, which I think we should. I think we've both hit it. There we go. An atheist asked, "If we're to love our enemies, why can't God forgive Satan and have peace in heaven and on earth?" What's the best response to that? I think if that it did come from an atheist, it's the stereotypical atheist not understanding quite how evil he is. The reality is that the blame for unrest, unpeace, if you like, the blame for sin on earth, which is the cause of the unrest and the non-peace on earth, is firmly placed on our camp. It was Adam who chose to sin. It was Adam who willfully chose to go against God. And it has therefore been all of our faults, if you like, since then, for all of us to sin. It is fully in us. Now, certainly Satan can stick his leg in the way and help us to trip over and tempt us, but the reality is the sin is our fault. So even if God could forgive Satan, there's a whole bunch of theological problems with that. It still doesn't get away from the fact that the sin in the world, which is the root of the problem in the world, is our fault. Full stop. All right. Now, Jesus came to die in order to save us because we are made in the image of God. Satan, being an originally angelic being, is not made in the image of God. Neither are the rest of the angels, neither are the rest of the demons. So you'll find that hell, the internal punishment, was made for Satan first and foremost, right? It was as a punishment for his rebellion. And that's why Jesus came to die, was in order to give us a way to escape that same punishment, because we are living in rebellion to God as well. So if you want to ask, if you think that the solution to the corruption on earth, if you think that the answer for peace on earth is in getting rid of Satan, you underestimate just how evil we actually are.
You only need to look at the Middle East at the minute to see that.
Well, indeed.
And forgiveness requires repentance. You have to agree that you're a sinner.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a good place to finish, folks. God bless all. We will see you next week. I can't remember. I think it's a geological topic next week, isn't it, Sam?
Yeah. It's to do with rocks, so John's going to be happy.
And we should have Diane here as well next week, so that'll be great. So thank you very much, folks. Goodbye, God bless, and we will see you soon.